He walked with a flag-draped coffin. Airline staff tried to intervene, regretted it instantly. A quiet man in uniform stands at a check-in counter. A coffin waits behind him, draped in the national flag. What should be routine turns into something else entirely. Something no one at the airport that day will ever forget. Before we start the story, write in the comments from which part of the world you're watching today. There was a moment, just a second, when everything could have gone unnoticed. Colonel David Carter stood at the check-in counter, silent, calm, papers in hand. Behind him, a transfer casket marked with a small gold emblem waited quietly on a service cart. Covered with a national flag, its presence felt like a whisper in the buzz of the terminal. The airline employee barely looked up. "Name?" Carter answered clearly, offering his identification and military travel orders. The agent frowned. "This doesn't look valid." That was the first crack. Carter didn't move. "These are military orders. I'm escorting a deceased service member." The young man behind the counter, early 20s maybe, with a half-tucked shirt and tired eyes, blinked, then looked at the screen again. "Sorry, there's a flag. Something about needing additional verification." Carter didn't sigh. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "He died overseas. I need to get him home. Please check again." The agent tapped a few keys. His expression shifted. Confusion, then discomfort. "Yeah, I'm seeing something came through, but it says we can't board you yet. Internal review." "Internal review of what?" The employee didn't answer directly. "It's not me, sir. I just have to follow protocol." Carter's jaw tightened just a fraction. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for permission to board. Nothing more." The agent shifted in his seat. "I'll need to call someone." He didn't. Instead, he leaned to the side and began helping the next customer. And so Carter stood, in uniform, alone. The line moved. Time passed. No one said anything. He waited with a stillness that made people uneasy. He didn't pace, didn't call anyone, didn't look around with pleading eyes. He simply placed both hands behind his back and stared ahead. Steady, unmoving. Beside him, the casket. A woman with a baby passed, glanced at the flag-draped box, and looked away quickly. Another passenger murmured something, then fell silent. No one knew what to do. Minutes passed. Then Carter spoke. Not to anyone else, but softly under his breath. "He gave his life, and I can't even take him home." His words weren't meant to be heard, but someone did hear them. The man standing 2 spots behind stepped forward. Early 40s, tall, with the posture of someone who had once stood in uniform himself. "What the hell is going on here?" the man said loud enough for the line to hear. "He's escorting a coffin. You're denying him boarding?" The employee stiffened. "Sir, I need you to—" "No," the man interrupted. "You need to explain." Phones came out. A camera clicked. Someone whispered, "Record this." The room changed. An older woman stepped aside, gently took her child's hand, and approached Carter. She didn't say much, just looked at him, then at the casket and said, "My brother died over there too. Thank you for doing this." He didn't respond. Couldn't. But something flickered in his eyes. Not gratitude, something deeper. Pain held too long, briefly touched by recognition. The agent stood frozen. Behind him, screens blinked with boarding times and zone calls. But no one moved. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Military escorts are usually invisible, quietly processed, politely respected. This wasn't a protest. It wasn't politics. It was just wrong. And yet no supervisor came. No gate agent offered help. No apology was given. What happened next? None of them saw coming. But by then, it had already begun. A single post online, a 10-second clip. Carter's stillness, the flag, the silence, and a hashtag, Rashurn, let him fly. In the next chapter, everything will change. But for now, in this moment, a soldier couldn't get on a plane, and the country watched it happen. It began with a pause, a long, uneasy stillness that stretched across the terminal like fog. Colonel Carter remained where he was, unmoving. The line behind him had stopped advancing. The air felt heavier now. People weren't just waiting for their flights anymore. They were watching. Still, no one from the airline came. The agent had slipped away, allegedly to check with a supervisor, but hadn't returned. Another agent took his place at the counter, deliberately avoiding eye contact with the man in uniform. The veteran who had spoken earlier hadn't gone back to his spot in line. He stood nearby now, arms crossed, eyes fixed on Carter. He didn't say another word. Didn't need to. The silence was speaking for him. Phones were up. Not many yet, but enough. A young woman with a backpack whispered to her friend, "That's a military coffin, right?" Her friend nodded. "I think so. And they're not letting him board?" Another voice joined in from behind. "That can't be right." But the staff said nothing. Carter, still standing in place, lowered his eyes briefly to the casket beside him. It wasn't just a container. Not to him. Not to the family waiting on the other end. Not to the life that had once occupied it. Private Jason Reynolds, 21. Killed in an ambush during a routine convoy patrol. Second month of deployment. He'd been the youngest in his unit, and Carter had promised his parents, "I will bring him home. Myself." The words rang hollow now. He could have called someone, used his credentials, reached up the chain, but something inside him resisted. This wasn't about pulling rank. This was supposed to be simple. He had orders. He had clearance. He had a flag-draped coffin with him. What more could anyone need? The murmurs spread. A few passengers stepped out of line. One woman asked the agent directly, "Why isn't that officer being allowed to board?" The agent muttered something about internal clearance issues and waiting on a response from security. Another agent added, "It's a sensitive matter. Please return to the line." But the people didn't return. One man shook his head and said, "Sensitive? He's carrying a coffin." More phones went up. One passenger, a college-age man in a hoodie, started live streaming. "Hey everyone, I'm at Terminal B, and there's a soldier here who can't get on his flight. He's escorting a fallen comrade. A coffin is literally behind him. They're denying him for no reason." Another woman posted a photo. No caption. Just Carter, standing still, eyes forward, with the casket beside him. Within 15 minutes, that photo would be shared over 50,000 times, and the airport still did nothing. Then came the child. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, tugging his mother's hand, walking past the growing crowd. She noticed Carter and froze. Her hand went to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes almost instantly. She walked up to Carter slowly. "Sir," she said quietly, "I just wanted to say, my brother didn't make it back either. Thank you for doing this." Carter looked at her. He opened his mouth and stopped. He nodded. Nothing more. The boy beside her looked up and whispered, "Is that a hero?" The mother knelt down and said, "Yes, both of them are." Someone caught that moment on video. That one went viral too. Within 30 minutes, the terminal was humming with quiet fury. Dozens of passengers now surrounded the check-in area. They weren't yelling. They weren't causing a scene. They were bearing witness. The veteran stepped forward again. "I served. I've seen how we're supposed to treat the fallen. This isn't it." Still no supervisor. Still no solution. Someone muttered, "This is going to explode online." They were right. By now, the hashtag #JosherLetHimFly was trending across social platforms. Local news affiliates were tagging each other, trying to verify the story. Messages flooded the airline's social media pages. Inside the terminal, though, the airline's silence remained intact. Finally, a uniformed airport security officer arrived. Not to help, but to ask passengers to keep the area clear. The veteran turned toward him. "Are you here to stop us or to do the right thing?" The guard looked unsure. Then someone shouted from the crowd, "Is this what we've become? We can't even get a dead soldier home?" In another terminal, a regional news crew received a tip and rushed toward Gate D. In the control room of the airline's headquarters, blinking dashboards showed a sudden spike in brand mentions. All negative. Their comms team scrambled for a response. They had no prepared statement, no talking points, no damage control. Someone in corporate finally asked the question that should have been asked an hour ago. "Who is this officer?" When the answer came back, the room went quiet. Colonel David Carter, 28 years of service, numerous deployments, high clearance, no disciplinary record, escorting a confirmed military casualty with proper orders. Everything was in place. The error wasn't his. It never had been. And still he waited. He hadn't moved from his spot, hadn't sat, hadn't made a call. He didn't want an apology. He wanted a door to open. That's when the announcement came over the airport intercom. Attention. Flight 31 to Madison has been delayed. Estimated departure, undetermined. A murmur rose from the passengers. Then one man said aloud, "We're not getting on that plane until he does." And one by one, they began to sit on the floor, near the gate, near the counter. Passengers with families, business travelers, tourists, they sat. They were no longer just witnesses. They had become part of the story. And somewhere in a nearby military base, an officer answered a call. Then he made another. To the airstrip. A different flight was being prepared now. Not commercial, not delayed, but made for one man and one fallen soldier. And its engines were already warming up. The footage reached national television before the airline even issued a statement. On a screen in a newsroom 3 time zones away, a grainy video played on loop. A man in military uniform standing beside a coffin, surrounded by silent passengers, while an airline gate agent stared at a monitor, avoiding eye contact. Below the footage, a banner scrolled, "Denied boarding while escorting fallen soldier. Outrage grows." In the terminal, passengers were still seated on the floor. Some scrolled their phones. Others quietly watched Carter, who hadn't moved. They didn't chant. They didn't shout. They just stayed. A few offered Carter snacks or water. He declined each time with a polite shake of the head. From time to time, he looked at the casket. Not long, not emotionally, just enough to remember what mattered. Private First Class Jason Reynolds. He'd wanted to be an engineer. He used to sketch designs in the margins of his field journal. His mother had mailed him a small set of colored pencils for his birthday. He never got them. Carter had retrieved that journal from the combat outpost personally. He remembered flipping through it. Amidst the drawings of engines and mechanical schematics, there was a single simple picture. A little house with a porch, and in one window 2 stick figures, a man and a woman, his parents. That memory was the only thing holding Carter upright now. Upstairs, inside the airline's operations office, panic had taken root. The terminal manager had called twice, then the regional director, then the corporate liaison. Now an emergency meeting was underway via video conference. A wall of frozen-faced executives watched the trending hashtags climb. Let him fly, Josh honor the fallen, Josh shame of the gate. An intern on the communications team spoke up, voice shaking. The clip has been viewed over 3 million times. We're being tagged by Gold Star families. The American Legion is calling for a boycott. The vice president of customer affairs turned pale. Get legal now. We need a statement. Someone from the legal department offered a draft. We regret the unfortunate misunderstanding that occurred at Gate D. This was a result of an administrative error, not a reflection of our company's values. Another voice on the call cut in. Not enough. People want names. They want faces. They want to see the soldier get home, someone else said. That's what this is about. Back in the terminal, the line was gone. No one checked in. No one boarded. The gate agent who denied Carter had vanished. Instead, a new supervisor had arrived. Older, dressed neatly, with a badge and a careful smile. She approached Carter hesitantly. "Colonel, I'm very sorry. We're doing everything we can." Carter looked at her, not angry but unreadable. "Everything you can would have been done an hour ago." She swallowed. "We're trying to escalate." "You've already escalated it." He turned slightly, glanced at the passengers still seated on the floor, and then back at her. "This isn't about me anymore." At that moment, a voice crackled over the intercom. Not the airline, but airport control. "Attention, military personnel traveling through Gate D. Please remain in place. A transfer has been initiated." Passengers looked at one another. What did that mean? Then someone spotted it. Out the window, past the commercial gates, A large transport plane descending through the clouds. Gray, massive, marked with the seal of the military, a C-130 Hercules. It landed without fuss, taxied to the far end of the airstrip, and waited. Inside the operations room, a call from the Pentagon arrived. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but it was firm. An Army representative spoke plainly. Colonel Carter is to be transported via military aircraft. Do not obstruct. Do not attempt apology. Stand down. The call ended, and with it, any illusion of control the airline had left. A black SUV pulled onto the tarmac minutes later. Two officers stepped out and made their way toward the terminal. One of them, a lieutenant colonel, entered through a side security door and walked directly to Carter. He saluted. "Sir, we've got you." Carter nodded once. "Thank you." The officer glanced at the crowd and added quietly, "They're not going to forget this." "I hope not," Carter replied. As Carter walked beside the officers toward the exit, the seated passengers began to rise, slowly, almost reverently. No one applauded. No one filmed. They just stood. Many placed hands over hearts. A few saluted. The woman with the child, still near the back, whispered, "Go with him." Her son did. For 3 steps, then stopped, watching Carter walk away. The transport plane waited with engines running. On the tarmac, ground crew stood at attention as Carter and the casket approached. The rear ramp lowered, and a military detail stepped forward to receive the coffin. Carter stood by until it was secured. Then he climbed aboard without looking back. He didn't wave, didn't speak. He just sat beside the casket. The ramp closed, and the Hercules lifted into the sky. Later that evening, the airline released a statement. "We deeply regret the situation that occurred today involving Colonel David Carter. We failed to honor our commitment to the men and women who serve. A full internal review has been initiated." It was too late. The videos had already crossed the ocean. A national news anchor opened her broadcast that night with a single question. When did honoring the dead become optional? And still, Carter flew in silence. The hum of the engines filled the bay of the aircraft. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. He kept one hand on the coffin because that was his promise. And no one, no policy, no error, no silence would break it. The inside of the C-130 was dim and cold, its only light flickering softly along the walls of the cargo bay. The low, steady rumble of the engines wrapped around the space like a heavy blanket, muting everything, even thought. Colonel David Carter sat across from the flag-draped casket, his posture ramrod straight despite the fatigue pressing down on him. He had not spoken since boarding. He had not asked how long the flight would take. He didn't need to. This was the last leg of the journey, and it would be quiet. 2 airmen sat toward the rear, respectfully distant. Occasionally, they glanced at the colonel, unsure if they should say something, but never did. Everyone aboard knew. This was not a time for words. Somewhere below them, thousands of feet beneath the steel hull, the country continued to react. The video of Carter's silent stand at the gate had now reached evening news broadcasts. One anchor referred to it as a moment of national reckoning. Another, visibly emotional, called it a quiet act of honor louder than any protest. In the Capitol, members of Congress were already posting statements of solidarity. Gold Star families flooded the airline's inbox with testimonies. Some heart-wrenching, some furious, all echoing a single question. How did this happen? The airline's first apology had been dismissed as cowardly and corporate. A second, more detailed statement followed, admitting procedural failure, lack of escalation, and deeply regrettable misjudgment. But no name was attached to it. No executive appeared in public. No one stepped forward. So the public kept pushing. Inside a suburban house outside Madison, Jason Reynolds' parents sat by the phone. They had heard only fragments of what happened, most of it from social media. Their son's escort had been denied passage. Their son's coffin had been delayed. Their son, already lost, had for a moment been treated as if he were luggage. Jason's mother hadn't spoken for hours. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands folded over a photograph. Jason in uniform, smiling, still baby-faced, still someone's boy. His father stood at the window, phone clutched in one hand, watching headlights pass through the distant trees. When the official call finally came, confirming that their son and his escort would arrive in a few hours, neither wept. They'd already done that. Now came the waiting. In the belly of the plane, Carter removed his gloves and placed them in his lap. He allowed himself one memory, just one. Jason's first briefing. Young, nervous, with a barely hidden notebook in his pocket. Nodding too often, scribbling notes when no one else did. Afterward, Carter had asked him, "You planning to take over my job?" Jason had smiled. "No, sir. I'm just bad at remembering things unless I write them down." He'd meant it literally. Carter had smiled back, but now, in the cold echo of the cargo hold, that memory hurt more than any battlefield. As the plane descended, Carter stood. The casket was already secured to a wheeled platform, ready to be transferred to the honor guard waiting on the ground. Outside, a line of vehicles stood parked in respectful silence. One military van, one police cruiser, one black sedan. And beyond the fence, just past the trees, a small crowd had gathered. They weren't reporters. They were neighbors, veterans, strangers who'd read the story, who'd seen the images, who just wanted to be there, to say nothing, to bear witness. The back ramp of the C-130 lowered slowly, groaning open against the early morning air. Carter stepped down beside the casket, straightening his uniform. The honor guard moved forward with precision. No words, no gestures, only silent discipline. Jason's mother stood by the hearse, one hand clenched around a handkerchief, the other held tightly by her husband. As the casket was transferred, Carter walked with them, step for step. And when it was done, he saluted. Not quickly, not ceremonially, but with the kind of dignity that comes from knowing a life had ended before it had truly begun. Jason's father approached. His voice was hoarse but steady. "You brought him back." "I promised you I would," Carter replied. "You did more than that," the father said. Then, with tears in his eyes, "You stood for him when no one else did." Carter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. What words could meet that? Instead, he handed them the folded flag, a ritual he had performed too many times. But this time, as he placed it into the father's arms, his hands lingered. By the next morning, every national network had aired the full story. Not just the confrontation at the airport, but Carter's silent return, the vigil of passengers, the unscheduled military flight. The footage of the C-130 lifting off under pre-dawn sky became the symbol of something much larger. It wasn't politics. It wasn't outrage. It was grief and grace, and a question too large to ignore. What does it mean to honor a life? Colonel Carter refused interviews at first, but days later, after the burial, after the family had said their goodbyes, after the media storm had begun to fade, he sat for one, just one. The journalist asked, "When they denied you boarding, what did you feel?" Carter looked away, then answered, "I felt empty, but I wasn't standing there for myself. I was standing for him." He paused. He was 21. He liked drawing. He wanted to fix things, and he deserved better than silence. The interview ended there. He wouldn't let them ask about himself again. Meanwhile, in Washington, hearings were scheduled, policies reviewed, laws drafted. Within weeks, legislation was introduced requiring all commercial airlines to guarantee priority boarding for military escorts of fallen service members. No questions, no exceptions. The airline's CEO resigned. The gate agent's name was never released, but Carter remembered him. He didn't speak about it, not in anger, not in public. But he never forgot that first moment. Your ticket doesn't appear to be valid. But now at last, Jason was home. And Carter? He went back to his post, quietly, without ceremony. But something in him had changed, and something in the country had changed too. It had been 7 days since the flight. 7 days since Colonel Carter stood silently in that terminal. Since a line of passengers refused to sit. Since a country remembered something it had forgotten. The quiet weight of duty. And in those 7 days, a storm became something else. In Congress, hearings began. Testimonies were heard from veterans, Gold Star families, retired officers. A father, voice shaking, read aloud a letter from his son, written 2 days before he was killed in Afghanistan. It ended with a single line: "If something happens, I know someone will bring me home." The committee fell silent. The airline's general counsel testified reluctantly. They called it a procedural anomaly, a miscommunication, a failure to recognize authority. One senator leaned forward and said flatly, "You didn't fail to recognize his authority. You failed to recognize his humanity." The room applauded. The legislation passed in both houses with overwhelming support. It was named the Reynolds Act after Jason. Every commercial airline in the country would now be required by federal law to recognize and prioritize the transportation of military remains and their escorts. No delay, no questioning, no excuses. Airline stocks dipped. Their PR firms ran full-page ads of apology. But for most Americans, the apology had already come, in the form of Carter's silence. Carter never spoke about what happened again. He returned to base. He resumed his duties. His file remained unmarked, uncelebrated. He didn't seek promotion, didn't give follow-up interviews. He just continued. Those who served under him said he'd changed. Not colder, not harder, just quieter. Like something in him had gone farther than any deployment ever had, and didn't fully come back. The story faded from headlines, as his stories always do. But in quiet corners of airports across the country, changes began to show. A young sergeant escorting a casket was walked personally through a terminal by airline staff. A gate agent offered her seat to a corporal who arrived late from the tarmac. Pilots came down from cockpits to shake hands with soldiers carrying folded flags. No policies enforced it. People just remembered. On a rainy Tuesday, Jason Reynolds was finally laid to rest in his hometown. The ceremony was small, as the family requested. No cameras, no press, just those who knew him. Carter stood in full dress uniform beside the family, unmoving in the cold drizzle. He had carried the flag in his arms, folded with precise care. When the moment came, he approached Jason's father and placed it in his hands. His voice was steady. "On behalf of a grateful nation, I present this flag as a token of our appreciation for your son's honorable and faithful service." Jason's father didn't cry. He just nodded once and whispered, "He didn't know you'd be with him to the end. But we know." "Thank you." Carter's hands trembled, just for a second. Then he saluted and stepped back. Later, at the edge of the cemetery, a woman approached him. She was middle-aged, quiet, with dark circles under her eyes. She said, "I have a son. He ships out in the fall. I pray every night I never meet you at an airport." Carter nodded. He understood completely. The story might have ended there. But 1 year later, in a small military ceremony, Carter was presented with a folded parchment. Not a medal, not a commendation. Just a letter, handwritten by Jason's mother. It read, "Thank you for not just bringing him home. Thank you for standing for him when no one else did. You were his final uniform and his final shield." He kept the letter folded in his journal, the same one where he had placed Jason's drawing of the little house with the porch. He never showed it to anyone. But it went with him, everywhere. Years later, a young lieutenant would ask Carter, now retired, about the moment that defined his career. Not a battle, not a mission, but an airport. Carter thought for a long time before answering. Then he said, "It wasn't about me. I was just the one standing." The lieutenant asked, "Standing for what?" Carter looked out the window and said, "For someone who couldn't anymore."